Hey guys, what's going on? It's the triumphant return of Am I Missing Something? I'm Matt.
And I'm Zach.
And if you haven't joined us for one of these before, you missed a couple of really good episodes early on. And we are coming back with a very, I want to say, controversial genre of music. And
That's a good way
wondering
to say
if we're missing something, because I feel it was one of the most misunderstood genres of music. But I'm going to let Zach dive into this a little more.
Well, it definitely is one of the, maybe not controversial is the word, but definitely the most polarizing of genres in at least heavy music. We're talking about nu metal, the genre that saw Korn, Limp Bizkit, and a bunch of rap metal, nu metal bands take the universe by storm, and then suddenly became the most uncoolest thing in the world, only for some of it to become popular again for some reason. So on the show, we always try to examine, not criticize why it's terrible, why it's not terrible, but what is it about something that we're just missing? Why is it that something is so hated or so loved? But for this episode, I felt like we needed a little extra help, which is why I called my good friend Daniel Cordova, the host of an awesome podcast, Far Beyond Metal, to chime in and share a little insight that he has into nu metal. So Daniel, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
I guess only as excited as you can be to talk about nu metal with two fellow nerds as well.
I mean, this was like a nostalgic trip for me, like studying up a little bit on this. It was, I'm not mad about it.
So it's funny because when we were talking, Daniel, you reminded me about the song Last Resort by Papa Roach. And
you had to be reminded of that song?
Yeah. Well, it's funny because that song was all over the place, but I kind of just forgot how much I listened to it during my youth. So thank you for bringing that back.
You buried it that deep?
I kind of had to because it was everywhere. It was.
And see, this is the hate for it. I don't understand.
So, I mean, I think maybe let's start off with, because I think we can all three of us agree, in many ways, nu metal was a gateway drug for heavier music. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely.
I don't think,
for me.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree.
I guess, I mean, I'll start off with the band that I felt like I remember earliest discovering this genre was either Korn or Limp Bizkit, and it was all because of TRL, which is funny because we recently did an episode where we defined which three music videos best captured what TRL was. But I remember seeing a band like Korn at how dirty and gritty they were compared to NSYNC, to the Backstreet Boys, to 98 Degrees. And something about it just gravitated me to the genre. Matt, maybe start off. What do you recall first about nu metal?
The first thing that I recall about nu metal, I did discover Korn, but I didn't really get into Korn the way that a lot of people did in the beginning. Really, and I hate to even say this, and this is also one of those stigmas about nu metal, is that you just feel dirty when you talk about it. And I really got into nu metal on Limp Bizkit's $3 Bill, y'all, when they released, and I hate when bands do this, when they come out and they release a single that's a cover and it launches them. And they did George Michael's Faith, and that was it. That's like how I got into Limp Bizkit. And it was like, oh, okay, this is a cool song. Who's this by? Wait, this sounds familiar. Wait, George Michael? Oh, God. So from the very beginning, it was almost like a taboo, dirty thing, because I loved listening to the song. But then anybody who knew who George Michael was is like, really? But I digress. So that's my dirty beginning, Daniel.
My dirty beginning, I guess. I grew up in this small town outside of Sacramento called Woodland. And it's kind of the only heavy music there was. Like, there was one guy who was into Death and like Slayer and got me into Strap Young Lad. But everyone else like wore Korn hoodies, and we were that typical kind of town that would just eat this music up. And you couldn't escape Toxicity, which was a huge one for me. Yeah. And then we were talking about Last Resort earlier. Papa Roach is from the next town down from where I live now, called Vacaville. And so Sacramento claims them. So I couldn't escape Papa Roach just being everywhere. So Papa Roach, System of a Down, and then, I mean, it's a little later in the game, but Linkin Park is kind of what held me there, Hybrid Theory.
So there's two bands that you mentioned that you automatically think nu metal Like even when you say new metal, you think of Korn and maybe even Papa Roach. But then when you think of a band like System of a Down and Linkin Park, it's almost, you hear about this subgenre of bands who escaped the new metal tag, as if it was like, they went through something horrific and they survived. And that always kind of fascinated me, like, because I love System of a Down, but what is it about them that almost gets kind of like a pass? Whereas Korn, which I'm not necessarily saying that they're just as good or better than System of a Down, but you got to admit that at least those early records, they were doing something unique. So why do they not get, don't get a pass, whereas System of a Down, they're kind of the critical darlings, them and Deftones, of the whole genre?
For System of a Down, like, I listed them, but I would almost say that they're just their own beast. And they were lumped in the way where you couldn't really classify them as anything else. Like, as I was doing this deeper dive, I was starting to think about all these bands that are lumped in but can, like, break away from it super easily. Like System of a Down, like, nu metal's got hip-hop elements. I don't really think of any hip-hop elements in System of a Down's music. It's just kind of really bass groove stuff.
Yeah.
Or like Rage Against the Machine. One could say they're nu metal by definition, but no one really does.
Yeah.
And maybe that's what it is, that Deftones have gone this more echoey kind of emotional way away from the way they started out, so they get a pass based on later work. And that's the stuff I prefer by them anyway.
Yeah.
See, I would kind of go along the same lines too. Like when you think of System of a Down, they're just on a whole nother planet. Like nu metal doesn't fit them. Nothing really fits them. They're just their own unique thing. I think the only reason, and at least this is my opinion, is that a lot of, if you listen to nu metal, I just think that they tried to group bands that didn't use solos at the time as not being metal, and they couldn't throw them really anywhere else. If you listen to any of this stuff, it's all like chugs and very, in comparison to like Metallica, Megadeth, Slayer, all of them are really like solo driven. There's certain elements that you can define. Okay, this is really metal. This is thrash. But it was like, well, it's heavy. It's got guitars. It's got rhythm. But it doesn't sound like the rest of the metal that's out there. Like with the Deftones and Limp Bizkit and Korn, none of them really thrive on solos. They're not going to wow you with solos.
Which is interesting because that was kind of part of the criticism that a lot of people had too, was the lack of solos, to the point that when Metallica tried to incorporate some of those elements, they got ridiculed, thrown into the streets for not having solos.
Right, and that's what happened with Saint Anger. Is that album had a void of solos, in addition to having one of, or probably the worst drum sound of all time. But it's just the lack of being able to go in and say, okay, well, this is what your band's going to do, and you're going to be classified as metal. Well, nobody pieced these bands together. This whole thing kind of just cropped up on its own, and nobody was playing solos anymore. So how do we classify them? Well, it sounds heavy, maybe a little metal. Nu metal. Here we go.
Maybe this is a good segue into something that I've been just toying around with. So, of course, the thrash metal scene has the iconic Big Four. So every genre has, the Big Four. And I remember Metal Sucks did a article where they, quote, examined the sales of the Big Four of nu metal and just automatically said that the Big Four of nu metal was Slipknot, Korn, System of a Down, and Deftones. And something about that just really irked me. Partly because the fact that I was so irked by it kind of concerned me a little bit too. Like, why would I care? But it just didn't feel right. If you had to name the first four bands off the top of your head who you would define as the Big Four of the nu metal scene, who would it be? Daniel, maybe you want to start off?
I would agree with half of those, I think. Because Korn, I feel like, is no contest. They're the OGs. It's basically their baby. Slipknot is one of those bands that's kind of borderline for me, but they did enough of it early on that I would say the first two albums are definitely nu metal, but they're now newish metal with blast beats occasionally. For me, then it kind of goes off of that list where I would say Linkin Park, even though they were like kind of later to the game, but Hybrid Theory is just, like sololess guitar rock with scratches and whatnot. It really just seems like it's from a nu metal mold, and they perfected every part of it. And then even though, like, to me they're the band that aged the worst out of all of them, I'd have to go Limp Bizkit, because Fred Durst, whether you like him or not, was an icon for a really long time and sort of flew that flag.
I'll spare my opinions for 1 second. I want to hear, Matt, what your thoughts are, both on that list as well as what your list would be.
So I do agree with Korn. Korn hands down is there. Nobody's going to argue with Korn. Limp Bizkit, hands down, they flew the flag. They wore the red Yankee cap and waved it proudly, and they're nu metal through and through. Nobody would argue. And even to this day, Limp Bizkit is still trying to recapture their glory days. They're still trying to do the rap metal thing. They're even, I believe the last time that they were signed to Cash Money Records,
which feels like forever ago too. I mean, I remember I was still the assistant editor of Metal Insider, and that was like the big news. And we were like, all right, so any day now they're going to be releasing some new music, and it's still been nothing.
Well,
I don't think they have to at this point.
Well, they don't.
They've become one of those. They become one of those bands that could just ride on that legacy. Like, they're still headlining festivals, but yeah. I don't think they need anything new.
No, they don't need anything new. But I just remember how old. When that happened, it was just crazy.
Just to poke the bear a little bit on that one, I recently, or not recently, but I read an article. God, it's probably about a couple of years ago at this point. Fred Durst said that he secretly released the new album. I forget what it was called. I think it was something like Disco Elephants or something. But he secretly released the album online, and nobody to this day has found it and played it.
Okay, so crazy thing on that. That was my theory for the last 13 years since Tool released the album. I swore like they put something out on Bandcamp that sounded just like Tool. They didn't call it Tool. Somebody heard it and was like, these guys suck. They just sound like Tool. And then like it's still floating out there. No one noticed, because 13 years to just do what they did on like a drop D guitar. No way. They were putting out other stuff. We just don't know where it is yet. So
they just weren't legally allowed to call it Tool yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe Fred Durst just heard that Tool theory. He's like, ooh, I want to apply this to Limp Bizkit, even though he has no real proof of that it happened. So those are your three. I feel like was there one more that you had?
That was two.
Sorry.
Oh, that was two. I thought that was
No, we just got very into Limp Bizkit for a minute.
Which, fair warning, it's going to happen again.
Oh, it will. This whole thing is going to just get into Limp Bizkit. So those are the first two we got: Korn, Limp Bizkit. Third one is definitely, in my opinion, Linkin Park. Linkin Park, they took the nu metal sound and they molded it to their own. They shaped it in different ways. And I think that's kind of where I think nu metal, classifying them as nu metal is, yes, a thing that we need to do, but they also aren't a part of the dirtier side of nu metal. This is like the shining beacon of nu metal. Like Korn started it. Linkin Park, in my opinion, perfected it, because they took it and they did remixes on remixes, and the remixes sounded great. And then they released a controversial album in Meteora, and even on there, they did their own thing, and it sounded amazing. And now, or before Chester passed away, they kind of completely evolved into pop. But the albums along the way, they kind of took the electronic elements that started like with nu metal and kind of molded it and twisted it and shaped it into things that, we necessarily, as people who loved Linkin Park, and I'm speaking for myself, loved Linkin Park in the beginning. It was like, well, where's the Linkin Park that I know? Like when they got to 10,000 Suns, it was like, well, this isn't the Linkin Park that I know. But I'm quite sure that this was just the evolution of nu metal going further and further and further away from the rock side. But that's just me. So that's band number 3. And band number 4, it has to go to another band that's going into pretty much the same territory as Limp Bizkit. It's Papa Roach. So if you listen to any of their stuff nowadays,
wait, you're giving Papa Roach that high of a ranking.
I'm giving
wild, and they're like local boys. I'm legally required to let. I'm like, that's insane. Sorry, carry on.
I have to give it to Papa Roach. I mean, I did write on my list Slipknot. I did write on my list the Deftones, but thinking of Papa Roach, like I think that they're the ones who are holding true to nu metal the most. Like they're afraid to let it go. Like the angst is that they put out in the very beginning, obviously it was about a father who was never there, or that they didn't have much growing up, and things like that. Just young angsty band putting stuff out there that other people can identify with. It was great, it worked. But now if you listen to them, it's very electronic, it's very evolved, because obviously the technology and everything's come such a long way. But just the band themselves, they're afraid to let go of nu metal to try either to be completely rock or to go more hip hop and just abandon all the guitars, period. But Papa Roach, I think the most pure example of what nu metal is nowadays. So
Interesting.
Korn, Limp Bizkit, Papa Roach, Linkin Park. Zach?
So I was not expecting that, to be completely honest, but interesting, fair points. And I'll get to that in a second. So, and also I realized that my fourth choice might kind of make everyone cringe as well. But I think without question, for everything that you guys, what was that? Crazy Town?
Was it Crazy Town?
It was the fifth. If we expanded it to five, maybe Crazy Town.
Zach, you're my butterfly.
Oh,
sugar baby.
Without question, Korn and Limp Bizkit, for all the things you guys said, and I'm actually really shocked that, maybe not shocked, because we'll kind of get into the love-hate of just Limp Bizkit itself. But those two, I think, when you think of nu metal, it's a no-brainer that you think of those. The third, and this is the third and fourth spot I've been really toying with, and if you ask me next week what my opinion is, it might even change. But right now, I'm going with Slipknot for the third spot, because I do kind of think that they capture the Metallica slot in that they can headline an arena. They can stay, and they still are huge and popular. And if you think about it, you can maybe even argue that they're the reason why a lot of the newer bands are slowly picking up on nu metal sounds too, because of Slipknot. They're kind of still what makes some of those elements cool, or at least popular. So I think Slipknot deserves to be in the big four. And this spot, I am torn between either giving it to Linkin Park, but to me, Linkin Park, I always kind of, in my mind, thought of them as the Bon Jovi of nu metal, in that they kind of, just like Bon Jovi, they started off as like a light hair metal. They were in the hair metal scene until once hair metal became gross and everyone was distancing themselves, they transitioned to being just a pop band. And I feel like Linkin Park did that with Minutes to Midnight, where they literally like, no, we're not even really hard rock anymore. We are just a rock commercial radio band.
That's an interesting take on that album.
Maybe it's a nice take on that album too.
Actually, you saying, comparing the Bon Jovi, when Matt was talking about them, it made me think of Korn is Motley Crue and Linkin Park is Bon Jovi.
So would Limp Bizkit be Poison?
Sure. Jackal, maybe? No, Slipknot would be Jackal.
So, now I can't think of Korn as anything but Motley Crue. So with that said, I'm not 100% sold about Linkin Park, just as much as I'm not 100% sold on the band that I'm about to propose. Disturbed. They don't necessarily have the same rap elements that a lot of nu metal bands do, but they definitely have a nu metal sound. I mean, they were huge in 2000 with their debut. They slowly evolved to incorporating a little bit more butt rock guitar solos into it, but it's kind of hard to deny that the same people who were into Limp Bizkit in 2000 were just eating up Disturbed. And if you also kind of think about it, even though Disturbed is still touring, don't necessarily know if they can really headline arenas anymore, but they try to, and they do half decent. But there's still kind of a nasty taste that fans who are outside of metal get when they hear the name Disturbed. And if you think about it, that almost is kind of nu metal in summation, is you don't really feel comfortable saying nu metal out loud, just like you don't feel comfortable saying, up next we have Disturbed. I'm kind of leaning towards finalizing my big four as Korn, Limp Bizkit, Slipknot, and Disturbed. I see a lot of interesting mixed faces looking at me right now. And I don't blame you. I'm not sure if I'm happy with myself for even saying this out loud.
Well, by your summation of what new metal is, you're saying to me that it's any band that you feel
That makes you
cringeworthy
cringe.
about talking about. Exactly.
Yeah, that's fair. Maybe
I,
that's not.
I don't. To me, Disturbed isn't new metal. I think they just got
Really
lumped it. They just got lumped in there because, well, the metal scene is kind of like at this point very back burner to everything. So hey, let's just throw them in with new metal. That doesn't sit right with me, but it's not my list.
Well, Daniel, you seem to have strong opinions on this as well.
Well, my feeling is if you were gonna say that for Disturbed, that you would instead swap in System of a Down for the same reasons.
And I was
Like they
thinking
haven't
about
done
that
anything
too.
since 2005 or 6 or whatever, but they can still headline a festival. I saw them at Aftershock 2 years ago, and that place was there for System of a Down. After Disturbed at the same festival, second to last, maybe third to last on the night. Like the legacy of System of a Down, like they're kind of gross, but they also are still like a darling. Like they still get good press. They don't get well, with the drummer and Serge yelling at each other, they get that weird press now. But if System of a Down announces a tour, Metal Sucks isn't going to shit on the tour. They're going to be like, System of a Down's touring. Those songs you've heard for 15 years, but whatever. Yay.
No, it's you know what? I mean, that was definitely a band that was like on the edge of being on my list too. And like I said, next week I might have a completely different list, but for some reason Disturbed, and it's interesting because as I was preparing for this, in addition to listening to some new metal bands, I was checking out this video series from the punk rock MBA series that kind of just analyzed new metal and it was popular, why it wasn't popular anymore. And one of the things they pointed out was that there's almost like, and kind of like to your point, Matt, that there was, it wasn't necessarily just one style. I mean, it kind of gets characterized as one style, but really it was just a bunch of bands kind of lumped into each other because they didn't necessarily fit into what, other genres came before it. And it talked about how, Incubus and Deftones, they were a little bit more alt rock. Then you had Disturbed, the Breaking Benjamin, who are more post grunge. So maybe that's what makes new metal kind of difficult, is that it's a little bit all over the place. Which you can argue that System of a Down, what made them so beautiful was that they were a little all over the place.
I watched that same video because I think you sent it my way, and it actually got my wheels turning about my number 4 spot. Like, well, a 4th spot. Like, I could easily be convinced to drop Slipknot because of that video highlighting industrial new metal and my personal favorite new metal band, Static X. I still love Static X. They put out a new album, and it's kind of great, actually.
But like, I think it's interesting because that is definitely a band that was, I don't know if it's fair to say that they didn't get enough credit, but they did have some interesting elements to them, even during the late era of them where they weren't necessarily so popular. They like Start a War, I actually thought had some pretty decent songs in there.
Shadow Zone's my favorite album. That's what
I love Shadow Zone.
That's when the decline started, but that's such a good album.
I love Shadow Zone.
Like, it just felt like it was a little like a band vibe to it. So you're tempted to put Static X in the big 4, which is interesting.
But then just the legacy of, I don't know, they just like are trumped in every way as far as influence and stuff by Slipknot to me. So I had to give it to Slipknot. Like I could easily, if like we talked before about maybe doing 6, I could have put in Static X and then just like one more just for me because I was a dorky bass kid, and throw in Mudvayne. Because Ryan from Mudvayne is one of the most unsung bassists of all time. You
know what? That's a band that also doesn't get a lot of credit for what they did too. I mean, I think, unfortunately, Hell Yeah kind of, puts them in the shadow a little bit too much, unfortunately. Because they were, even again, like 2005 post new metal wave, like they were becoming a decent hard rock band in their own right, Mudvayne. So maybe before I segue into a hot button question, if we were to expand to 6, or as I want to try to get this to be a thing.
You are trying so hard on this.
I'm trying so hard. The 6-6. You got the big 4, the new metal 6-6. Not hard to say at all. If I was to do it, I would definitely then expand it to be Limp Bizkit, Korn, Slipknot, System of a Down, Linkin Park, and Disturbed. Is that 6? I can't count.
That's
like
6.
Drowning Pool.
We'll
Just
go
like
with
Drowning
that.
Pool, I can't count. So, Matt, in addition to your 4, is there 2 bands that you would add on to that?
Yeah, so we got Korn, Limp Bizkit, Papa Roach, and Linkin Park. Those are the four from before. And then you gotta, because when you think of the new metal, one of the defining characteristics is drop tuning and bringing more than six strings to the table. You got to add the Deftones. Between Korn and the Deftones, they single-handedly managed to sell 99.9% guitars that had more than six strings to anybody who played guitar at the time. So we have to add the Deftones and then Slipknot. There's no other band that I would think to even put on this list.
Fair enough. Daniel.
I would probably go Static X, like I said, just because they had their own version of what was going on. And I know I was saying Mudvayne, but I might just have to give it to Deftones on those first couple albums. Like I'm not that's not the era of Deftones I enjoy, but I can't knock that for being like important to the scene.
It's interesting because when I decided just post on Facebook asking a question, hey, Facebook friends, what are your thoughts on Deftones and who would you name the big four of new metal? And I was surprised at how a lot of people are hesitant to lump Deftones into this. And I don't know if it's because they didn't see the connection or if because they loved the Deftones so much that they didn't want to.
It's definitely the latter. It's definitely the latter.
Totally B.
Yeah. Which is so funny. Like, where did it, maybe this is a good segue into the next topic I want to bring up is how did something so popular get dropped so down the totem pole in popularity? And I don't necessarily want to say it's because of Limp Bizkit, but I think their trajectory of careers and career heights and popularities, it's hard to ignore the similarities in that here is a band, Limp Bizkit, who went so high up in popularity to the point that Fred Durst was a celebrity. He was maybe even the last rock figure to enter mainstream media to the extreme heights where he was appearing in movies as himself, where he was on TV nonstop, to literally no one wanting to touch them with a 6-foot pole. Like, they just became so unpopular so fast. And I think it's kind of hard to ignore how that kind of happened to nu metal as a genre too.
I have a very interesting theory about this, and it's in two parts. One you just mentioned, because Fred Durst was such a figure and he was everywhere and he was a complete doucher. So because he was in the magazines, he was on TV, he was on the radio, all of his douchebagness was all over the place. So you knew him, you knew how much of an asshole he was, and then all of this other music that is associated with him is going down that same rabbit hole. That's A. B is the rise of the internet. Now think about this. Before this, you really didn't have the internet. It was like nerds playing around on chats and forums, and nobody was really taking the internet seriously because nobody knew what it was. But now you're talking 97, 98, 99, the rise of the millennium. That's the internet is growing up. It's becoming a thing. People are going there to get information. People are transmitting information faster than it's ever been transmitted before. So now when people get bad press, it is traveling much faster and to many more people than initially intended. Think about like bands in the 80s. Like, what did you have? You had TV and you had MTV and you had like the press. You really only had to formulate your opinions on those things. And if you didn't actively go seek that out, then, well, you're not going to really know about it. But now the internet's everywhere. It's in everybody's face. It's the new and upcoming thing. So, of course, everybody had to get on it. Everybody had an opinion. And everybody still has an opinion 20 years later. So I think that's two of the main reasons that the entire genre of nu metal was brought down.
Daniel?
I definitely see parts of that. Piggyback on the internet idea, I feel like with the ability to get information about all these bands so easily, this is like around when Napster happened. So you're able to find new music way faster. And the scene just was killed by new music coming at listeners super fast. Like when I lived in Woodland, there was one record store in town called Barney's Records and Tapes. It closed a few years ago, but it was run by this couple of juggalos. Like, I don't say that with any slam on juggalos. They had the tattoos. They were proud of it. I think the guy had juggalo on his arm. They were juggalo and proud. they brought in new metal because it's like, this is the kind of stuff they like. So I couldn't escape it. So that's why I was like, all right, cool, Static X, all right, cool, Korn, whatever. This is like what was available to me that wasn't at Target. Because if you got your metal CDs at Target, that wasn't cool. I still did sometimes, but it wasn't cool. It's true. Like you go on release day, that stuff already on sale. It's great. Then being able to find new metal faster was just like unbelievable. So as soon as I found bands that were like Mastodon or Killswitch Engage or like Trivium, some of these bands didn't age well. Like Trivium, I think gets a bad rap in some circles. Trivium slaps. But basically, Ozfest 2005 is what killed my love for new metal. That lineup, and I found them all just by seeing the lineup, finding them on the internet. But then, like, I think a band like Crazy Town can be blamed for this.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
The minute, like, it's so easy to copy the sound and have a one-hit wonder of that genre, it's diluted to the point where it just doesn't matter anymore. Like, if new metal had the big genre that followed it, like grunge did for hair metal, I could draw more comparisons. But I don't know, post-grunge, Breaking Benjamin stuff, that's just kind of, it's fine. But, like, that's what was big after new metal around here, and that's when I fell off from, like, the radio.
You know, you mentioned grunge and hair metal. And to me, growing up, I always thought that new metal took a lot of the downtuned grittiness of grunge music, but then what made them kind of new metal stand out, or at least popular among adolescent teenage boys, was the fact that, yeah, they didn't have the guitar solos or even the talent that some of these hair metal bands had, but they were partying and getting a little bit sexist like the hair metal bands. And if you think about it, that hasn't really aged well. And I could almost make the argument that the fact that they were so not even just inclusive to only males, but exclusive to only males in a way, but the way that they objectified women, it's almost the same way that when grunge came around, most fans were like, you know what, I'm sick and tired of women being treated like shit and objects. And new metal kind of brought that mind frame back. And I almost wonder if just the way that they kind of made it an all boys club kind of alienated them. Because if you think about it, the only band that really incorporated female members was Kitty. And their whole, I don't want to say gimmick, but what kind of made them stand out was just the fact that they had 4 women in the band versus all dudes. And I'm just wondering if, especially then going into, Daniel, what you were saying about Mastodon, Trivium, and Killswitch Engage, let's not forget Matt's point. There was a lack of guitar solos that kind of made a lot of critics always objectify them anyway. So now suddenly, not only were we getting bands that brought guitar solos back in the metalcore scene and or whatever scene you consider Mastodon to be at that point, but then you also had bands from the screamo emo rock era that was touching back into the emotional lyrics that the grunge era kind of captured best as well. And I bring that up because I thought that was a great point that the Punk Rock MBA mentioned their video retrospective as well, is that come by 2003, 2005, when you went to Hot Topic, it was very different looking, and it had a lot more different choices for genres. And you didn't necessarily need to objectify women in order to like heavier music anymore. So I'm just curious if you guys think that kind of played a role in its and maybe making it not necessarily helping kill new metal, but maybe that's kind of why some fans are like, oh, I don't want to be associated with new metal. That's the one where Kid Rock talked about chicks with beepers and talked about, just where even Fred Durst was doing disgusting things to women on video camera. Like, he did it all for the nookie. I mean, say what you will about the dumb lyrics, but some of it was just downright just kind of cringeworthy for how disrespectful it was.
I'm going to make an interesting point, and you can tell me if I'm completely off on this. I think we're seeing the same thing happening nowadays with the amount of technology that's out there and the availability of it for people to make their own music, that we are getting such horrible music that this was really the first wave of that. People couldn't play solos anymore. Like, granted, yeah, they can play guitar. They have talent. They got rhythm. They got something to say. Great. So let's get some people together. Let's make a band. Let's see what happens. Great. It worked out for bands like Korn and the Deftones. But, for some of these other bands, like the lower bands that, didn't really stand out as much, I feel like they maybe, they're just following like, hey, this sounds easy to do. Let's go ahead and try and do it. Not really much to new metal. But then this is kind of the reverse of the grunge thing. Grunge came after hair metal. Hair metal was like all about the solos, all about the speed, the technique to a certain degree. And then bands like Killswitch Engage and Trivium, they came back with, this fire and brought back the solos and the technicality of music, saying, no, you actually need some talent to do this. It's not just about being able to get up on stage. You need to get up on stage, have something to say, and be able to play. So I think that's, one of the biggest things is that anybody could do it. And just not anybody, but, people who had the means to do it, they could do it. And that's why there was such a boom, and there were so many bands that were lumped in with nu metal at the time, because it took very little talent.
Thoughts on that, Daniel?
Oh, agreed. Like I was saying, it just became easy to copy and then just make a formulaic version of it. And then, yeah, the sexism part of it, that definitely did not age well. I mean, that's kind of all I got on that.
But now we're in the year 2020, and suddenly there's a lot of bands out there, some who are actually massively popular on radio, like Bad Wolves, and then some of these newer, younger bands who are taking a lot of nu metal elements and proudly declaring them as influences. How did suddenly this genre, who you still kind of get an uneasy feeling when you're talking about nu metal, how did it suddenly become kind of popular in today's day and age? And I part of me almost wonders if it's a mixture of its accessibility, because if you think about it, a lot of nu metal kind of just simply took the extreme riffage that Pantera had, but then, to your point, Matt, took out the solos. And,
don't lump Pantera in with this.
But you know what? I am. And I love Pantera.
They're not sexist. They're just racist. Get it right. They might be sexist. I don't listen to their lyrics. I hate Phil.
I mean, listen, they only made love to a certain type of women. That's all we're saying. Anyway, but I mean, I think we have to, because they were definitely a huge influence on bands like Limp Bizkit, on Korn, on the extreme approach to guitar work. But then some of these bands just incorporated some more hip hop elements to it, or some more grunge elements to it. So fast forward, we're here in 2020, and I almost wonder if it's just because there is a little technicality to it. Does a band like Slipknot prove that you can still be technical and good at your instrument, but can still be nu metal, or at least still encompass some of nu metal?
See, where I disagree with you is I think that the band, once again, this goes back to the point that I made earlier, is that the reason why the bands of today are able to do some of this and proudly say that, these bands influenced me from the nu metal era, is because the technology to make them sound good. Like, I think I watched a little bit of that video that you sent, and I think one of the bands on there was Suicide Silence.
Yeah, they incorporated a lot.
I could be wrong on the name, but it sounds like I'm not. But like what they had playing on the video, it's like, well, you sound like you're just doing what they did in nu metal, is just chugging away. Yeah. But then you have the ability to have somebody slice this thing up in Pro Tools and make it sound as pristine as you want. So while bands, I think like Korn and Slipknot, I'm going to start with these two, they had talent. Korn did their own thing. They did it very well, and other people copied it. So Korn, I am just completely saying that they were original in their own way, and they did something completely new. So good on Korn. Slipknot, you have people who can play. You have this original idea. The masks, and the other thing that I saw with Slipknot is in their early performances, the passion. There is so much, there's so much going on, but that every single one of those guys are passionate on that stage, and they can play. So if you launch yourself in something that's simpler just to get started and then see where it evolves and grows to. Look at Slipknot today. The only band that I think Slipknot has not surpassed on this list is Korn.
In regards to
talent, selling, the draw.
So wait, you're saying that because I was actually about to say that Slipknot has definitely overshadowed Korn in that.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I mean, honestly, it wasn't until
there's not Korn Fest. There's not Fest. It's an international festival with their name on it.
Okay.
Also, it wasn't until I would say the past year or so that Korn finally got back into the co-headlining game. I feel like it took for a few years. They were playing second fiddle to Actually, even I had to go back to even make sure I wasn't reading this wrong. I think it was 2014. It was Slipknot's headlining arena tour with special guest Korn. Not Slipknot and Korn. Slipknot with special guest Korn.
It was Slipknot's press. That's what it was. That's what I'm sticking with.
I think it was more so even just Korn. It took Korn a while to kind of remind people, hey, yeah, I know that we were new metal, but we were first. We weren't just lumped into it. We started it.
Yeah, but Korn did so many other things. They tried that Path of Totality. They tried to do the dubstep thing. And then, God, where did they go after that? Was that Korn 3 after that?
Korn 3 was after that, I think, which was a very mediocre album.
Right.
To say the least. But
they tried. They tried different things. I would say that Slipknot was a steady evolution into what they really wanted to be. And Korn was doing their own thing for so long that they stopped at one point and said, let's do something different. Let's try to go somewhere.
But I also would argue that part of it was that a lot of fans became stale on Korn. And I think maybe now, because I don't necessarily think there's a new young fan going, oh, I discovered Korn from the new album. I think Korn has entered into the classic rock angle in that they're pure nostalgia. I know it sounds gross, and I hate saying it because it makes me feel old. But to me, in fact, I'll even go as far to say that even by 2004, I was looking at Korn as a nostalgia band and not, they're a band that I'm excited to hear a new record from. In fact, I remember I had pretty much written Korn off by 2004, but then I saw them on tour with Linkin Park at the Project Revolution tour, and I'm like, oh yeah, I do remember this song. Oh yeah, I remember that song too. So I would almost argue that Korn got into the nostalgia realm really fast, whereas Slipknot, it's an event when their new album comes. It's an event when they announce a tour.
Considering by 2004, Korn was already out for 10 years at that point? What they do, 94, 95 for the debut?
94,
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so they had a lot more credibility at that time. So maybe I can understand them going through a midlife band crisis and falling into that nostalgia pit at that time. That's just me, though.
Daniel, thoughts? You're slowly defending me, which I love to hear. I don't get to hear that often.
About Korn being surpassed by Slipknot. Yeah. I mean, I just feel like that's. I find a hard time arguing with that based on shows I've been to, writing about them when I do like you said, Slipknot is an event, Korn is a band, and you said something about them being classic rock. I think the definition is 25 years or something since their first. That gets them rock hall eligible, whatever.
Yeah.
That gets them rock hall eligible, which is 1994, is 26 years ago. So they're eligible for the Rock Hall of Fame, which is weird and gross.
That is so weird
time's
and gross.
Scary.
That really.
But as far as why it's making a comeback, Metal Injection recently ran a piece of 5 bands that are spearheading the new metal revolution or whatever, the second coming.
Yeah.
I checked out those bands and have never felt more out of touch with modern music than that moment, because this is the same stuff that was going on then, except it's now has Code Orange glitches to it, like Matt was saying about Suicide Silence. You can go in and cut those in and stuff, and I just don't understand it. But also I'm well, this has a sweet tapping guitar solo, so that's the part I like. So I guess good for them, they're finding the middle ground. So I think it's meshing everything, but then just going back to grooves, because grooves and beats are just something that people can't get over. And like, if a beat's great, that's gonna survive. And Korn always had great grooves and great beats, and maybe that's what people want right now.
It's funny you say your reaction to those 5 bands as well, because I saw that article too, and I had a similar feeling. I was like, I guess I really am out of touch. And it was the similar feeling that I get from listening to a lot of current hip hop and rap too. I'm like, well, wait, this is popular? This is a popular song? And it made me kind of think, well, you know what? If you think about it, nu metal became really popular right around the time that gangster rap and the West Coast, East Coast rap wars were kind of happening, and there's a signature rap sound there. It almost made me wonder, like, is this kind of a reaction to the pop, to Drake and Post Malone, like the current rap scene, and how that's kind of like, is the current wave of nu metal just a reflection of what's going on in rap and hip hop currently? And am I just becoming an old guy for saying, I don't get it? Like, which is, I think, maybe even more savage is me saying out loud, I don't get it. Like I have my own dad. So, but I think you made a good point too, that like the groove element, I think will always resonate with people.
It's just in our human nature to kind of facilitate towards grooves and beats. I mean, look at Tool. Like all of their beats, or not all of them, but some of them go based on like that human rhythm, and that's the circadian rhythm that humans supposedly mesh to. They try to play that into their music, and that's how you feel like just drawn to listen to Tool. Or maybe it just might be me. Mm-hmm. But that there's definitely something to be said about having grooves and having beats and having things that just connect with you on a primal level.
So I think it's fair to say that 3 human beings have talked way more about nu metal than most people have in their lifetime. So maybe in closing, does anyone have any last thoughts about the love-hate relationship that people have with nu metal?
One thing I will praise nu metal for that they don't really get a lot for, like credit for, is like, mind you, I am a boring white man, but the first time I saw hard rock music with people of color was in nu metal, because you had El Nino, or like honestly, the first time I saw women in rock music was Kitty, but in nu metal you had El Nino, and you had people of color that were like in these metal bands who were breaking up just like pale, pasty white guys. And I've noticed that with this current resurgence as well. Like one of the bands on that list is fronted by a black woman, which is rad. So nu metal, sexist, yes. Inclusive, also yes. You kind of have to be if you're aping hip hop so hard.
That's true. Limp Bizkit, for as much as we might like to joke that Fred Durst was ripping off the hip hop culture, he also introduced a lot of white kids to hip hop, to Wu-Tang Clan with the Method Man collaboration. That
was the first time I heard those guys. Yeah,
even to like Ice Cube, to having him on the Family Values tour. I mean, you can make the argument that nu metal introduced a lot of rock kids into hip hop that might not have experienced that either. Which you can make the argument though that maybe that's part of what left a bad taste in people, is how you had a bunch of white people trying a little too hard.
And there's that.
To do cultural appropriation, but I see your point.
That's the part where it's like I understand that as well, but I'm wrong on that part. That part's gross. Never mind. Nu metal's trash. Throw it all away. I've been swayed. You got me. Delete this. I'm leaving.
But you made a good point. I appreciated it still, though. It kind of wasn't. It was sort of inclusive. I get it.
There was bits of points to it. Okay, never mind what I said. I like there was El Nino. They spoke Spanish, and they were very, very helpful to me.
Matt, last thoughts on nu metal?
Well, just
make it better than mine.
Well, just to go on El Nino, I mean, those guys eventually evolved into a lesser-known band called Cortez, and that band was equally as awesome. They did the whole like Mexican metal thing, and it was really cool for I think like a couple of years. But yeah, going back to what we're talking about here with nu metal, I think that a lot of the music that came out of there, people don't give enough credit for, and I will be the first to say that I still listen to Limp Bizkit. It's still on in my music library, and I still listen to Linkin Park and Korn, and all these bands that we talked about on here I listen to. And I feel like we've been jaded so much because of the nu metal thing, because all the bands got bad press. And the whole genre got bad press. But I mean, I'm not comparing them directly to Led Zeppelin, but Led Zeppelin also never got great press when they came out. But years later, it was like the salvation of the music world that Led Zeppelin was a band and that they put out all the music, and Led Zeppelin could do no wrong. But when back in the day, Rolling Stone was, doing reviews on their albums, they got like 2 and 3 star reviews and short reviews. And, nobody got Zeppelin when Zeppelin was there. It took years for people to understand Zeppelin. I'm not saying that nu metal is as deep as Zeppelin, nor is it as good as Zeppelin. But I think that over time, even people should be able to take that nostalgia factor away a little bit and just say, you know what? Some of this isn't so bad. It's not as dirty as I once thought it was. You know what? I'm going to give it another chance. That's all I have to say about that. And take care of yourself and each other.
It's not that dirty. I love that saying. For my final thoughts, I think you made a great point about the bad press, and the punk rock MBA video that I saw pretty much started off by saying that nu metal was never cool or accepted by critics. And I think that's true to a certain degree. Just like how with hair metal, for every Guns N' Roses, there was a White Lion. For every Alice in Chains, there was tantric. For every
Did you just
Korn,
compare Alice in Chains to tantric?
Hear me out. For every you're not agreeing with me either, Daniel. So
well, I just can't pull a C tier grunge band that wouldn't piss people off. I want to say Tad, but I know people love Tad.
well, yeah, that maybe
I don't know anything about tantric.
They're post grunge band. My point being is that for every Korn, which I think we can all agree had some really unique elements to it, there was a Coal Chamber. There was a band. There was a Crazy Town. There was a band that just brought a whole genre down. And I think what made nu metal polarizing was the bad elements kind of outweighing the good. It kind of distracting you from what made certain bands like Korn, like even Deftones, or even Limp Bizkit to a point. They were so loud for the time that it kind of distracted you from what made it interesting. And I think you can make that argument for a lot of genres, but for nu metal, for whatever reason, it just stood out like a sore thumb a little bit more. Maybe it was because it came at the height of MTV being the go-to place to see everything before the internet kind of made it easy to see more options. But I think it's hard to look at the good but maybe now more days, kind of going back to your point, Daniel, that the groove elements and it's bringing people back. So that was just a long-winded way of saying you sympathize with nu metal to a certain degree. So yeah, I mean, that's just my 2 cents. Daniel, thanks so much for joining us. Really, really appreciated humoring us in talking about nu metal. And also, really encourage everyone who's listening now to also listen to Far Beyond Metal on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, pretty much any platform you can imagine, right? You're just like us.
So it's on some I don't even know about, I bet.
If you send out a smoke signal, you can get a smoke signal back with a transcript of the podcast. I'm sure we're working on that ourselves. But also let us know what you think, those who are listening. Are we way off on nu metal? Is it much better than we remember? Is it much worse than we remember? Let us know on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram @Epic Footnote. And thanks so much for listening. Matt, thanks for humoring me and letting me talk about nu metal as well.
Zach, I did it all for the nookie.
Even via webcam. Thanks, everyone.
Sugar pie.